All right, geography students, we are going to embark upon our third unit of study, and this third unit is going to look at, drum roll, developed versus developing countries. So up to this point, we've learned about the 5 themes of geography. We've learned about the impact of culture on our geographic landscape. We have learned about the impact imperialism has on our landscape. We've learned about the influence of imperialism on our borders, the various types of borders, the impact of politics on our borders with gerrymandering, and the role that these major supranational organizations play in trying to maintain world peace and foster not only economic cohesion, but cohesion politically amongst all countries. So today what we're going to look at is when you think of the various countries in the world, not every country is equal to one another in terms of their banking system, their economic system, their healthcare, their education levels. And we're going to look at why that is. And when geographers try and figure out, okay, who's up there, who's the most developed country in the world, who's the least developed country in the world, we're going to learn some of the variables, some of the statistics that they look at to determine where the United States would be. Is the United States at the very top of world rankings in development, or are they at the bottom? And by the time you guys finish this unit, you should have a better idea of where the United States stands in terms of development and where other countries in the world stand in terms of development and how countries become more developed. All right, so today we're going to look at a few different slides here. I'm actually going to exit out of this for a second. What you can use here, if you'd like, if you give the computer a second to load here, these are the guided notes you can use as I walk through these slides. Today we're going to cover slides 1 through 10 or 1 through 11, something like that. And the guided notes that you see here are right in line with the video and the slides. All you have to do is either print this off or just make a copy of it and fill it in if you'd like. It'll save you the trouble of having to write everything down word for word. So entirely up to you. I'll be using a few other websites too to try and explain some things, so I'll be bouncing back and forth between the slides and a couple other sites. All right, so here we go. And some of the things pop up. So when you look at this map here, think about some of the trends that you notice on the map. One of the trends that you should think about is when it says where a country is grouped, the correlation between the map. It says look at analyzing population data. We haven't got there yet. We used to do population first. We actually do it after this unit. But one of the things that we try and think about with this map is what makes a country like the United States far more competitive with banking and money than, say, a country in South America or in Africa. And what we look at is a difference between developed and developing worlds. So if we were to take these statistics or variables and try and put them into 2 categories, categories you see there at the top, you have developed countries there on the left and developing countries on the right. Here's how these would sort out. So I'm just going to click through these because you're going to click through each one. Malnutrition. Malnutrition is a lack of calories, lack of proper food intake, which leads to starvation, disease, and sickness. So malnutrition is far more common in developing countries. Communism, a political system in which power is supposed to be concentrated at the top, but there should be equality for all. But at times the government doesn't do the best job of distributing resources, so there's not always equal food and rights for all. So communism is far more common in developing countries. Technologies found more in developed countries. Sewage treatment, having sewers and gutters and waste treatment plants that take care of our waste would be found more in developed countries. Corruption, meaning government officials abusing their power, spending the people's money in the wrong places, more common in developing countries. A low standard of living, we'll talk about what that means. A lack of technology, lack of access to the internet, Wi-Fi, Lack of, if you're a farmer, lack of knowledge of the newest types of fertilizers and seeds and pesticides. Clean drinking water would be found in developed countries. Now, it's not to say there's no clean drinking water in developing countries, but it's just much more common there. Democracy, we've learned about what democracy is. Hunger goes right in line with malnutrition, much more common in developing. Civil war, think of Rwanda genocide, the war between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Developing. Poverty would be found more in developing countries. Okay, so you got 4 left here. If you had to put these last 4 into either the column on the left, developed, or the column on the right, developing, where would you put them? So organized government, that would mean a system of government that shares power, that allows people to vote, that isn't corrupt. That would be found in a developed country, more often than not. Wealth, an abundance of money and income. Access to stocks and finances, more common in developed countries. A high standard of living, that means like access to education and healthcare, the right to vote, female empowerment, more common in developed. And high population growth, where would that be found? That would go into the developing category. A lot of these developing countries in places in Africa and Latin America and Asia, we'll talk about why that is, but in a nutshell, a lot of it has to do with lack of education and lack of access to healthcare and contraception, and the need for more children. Okay, so if you had to divide those, that's what they would sort out as. So I'm going to pull this up all right now. Okay. So when we look at rich versus poor can be applied not only to an entire country or to the world, but also within a country too. If you think about, if you went into the United States is a highly developed country. But if you went to the United States, you would still find areas within the United States, regions of the United States, that don't have the same level of development as, say, a New York City, a Chicago, a Los Angeles. You think about the difference in education levels between rural areas, meaning like more farmland areas, and urban areas. Lack of access to the internet and Wi-Fi, lower incomes, also lower cost of living. So you could apply some of these statistics that we're going to learn about in these slides, guys, not only to the global level, but also to a country or even a county level. Okay, like if you looked at the difference between like a Crystal Lake and a Harvard or parts of McHenry, there could be some differences there in the level of education, access to internet, income levels. Okay, so money plays a big role here. Pull this up. So a while back, post-World War II, geographers used to group countries based on their level of development into 3 categories: first world, second world, and third world, with first world being the countries at the top, like your United States, your European countries, high standard of living, essentially. Your second world countries would be like your bubble countries, your countries in the middle. Could be like China, Mexico, South Korea. Getting there, but not quite there yet. And then third world would be considered some of your African countries, some of your Asian countries in Southeast Asia, Latin America. And the reason they got rid of these terms is because it really degrades these second and third world countries, because it gives us this negative connotation. Oh, well, you're a third world country. Well, you're not a country where I want to live. Your people are poor. Your people are poorly developed. Your people are poorly educated. And it doesn't speak to some of the strengths of that country when you tell them that's a third world country. So what geographers came up with, skip through this slide, kind of just summarizes what I just said. It's deemed as offensive to these third world countries. Third world, it's like this third place. This third place that's far below the first place countries. Says what is most of Latin America considered at the time? They're considered mainly third world countries. So what the geographers do today, the terms that we use, developed and developing. And so there's an acronym there. MDCs are considered developed. LDCs are considered developing. LDC stands for less or least developed country, while MDC stands for more developed country. That way, it's not as offensive. It's not as offensive of a term, and it refers to some of your LDCs as developing, like they're getting there. It's a positive for them. It shows the countries like a South Korea, like a Brazil and Argentina. Those are considered developing countries. Those are countries that are on the way up. Their governments are improving. Their economic systems are improving. So that's why geographers tend to use the term developed and developing. If you wanted to transition from that third world status, that third world term, the term that geographers use now to speak to like the countries that need a lot of help as LLDCs, least less developed. But really, guys, you can group them into just LDCs. So your LDCs, I give an example there. You see Sudan here is listed as underdeveloped. Mexico is like that bubble country. It's on the way up, and the United States would be considered a developed country. So up to this point, you should know some of just like a ballpark. If you could just summarize for me what a difference is. If I go back to this slide. If you could summarize some of the differences mainly between developed and developing countries, and just tell me what the two terms that geographers use. They use the terms developed and developing, MDCs versus LDCs. So now what we're going to look at in these last few slides before I finish up the video for today, we're going to look at what statistics or variables geographers look at to determine, yes, the United States is an MDC. Japan, MDC. Belarus, LDC. Okay? All right, so one of the first economic tools that geographers look at is something known as GNI-PPP. That might not make a lot of sense, and I'm going to try and summarize this for you. GNI stands for gross national income. So gross means total. National income. So what gross national income is the total amount of money that a country's population earns. The total amount of money that a country's population earns. And then it says in purchasing power parity, it's divided by your population. Okay? It's divided by your population. So if I was to exit out of this, if you wanted to think about, okay, what are some of the, talk and do this at the same time, what are some of the highest countries in terms of GNI purchasing power parity? Here are some of them. So if you look at the top 10 here, you might be a little surprised. So what this means is that the average person in Qatar, the average citizen of Qatar, earns about 124,000 US dollars each year. This is as of 2018. You might be thinking, wow, that's a little surprising. I didn't expect to see like Singapore and Kuwait and Qatar up here, Luxembourg and Switzerland. So if you just look at the top 7, guys, even if you don't know too much about these countries, think about a similarity that they share. So the similarity that they share is they're all very small in population. And so if you're dividing the total income of your entire country by the population, if the population is really small, the number you're going to get is very large, which is why the United States is down here. The average person in the United States earns $63,690. Okay, compare that to like the world population rankings, which I'm going to pull up here, provided my internet helps me out. Notice, like, look at the top: China, 1.4 billion; India, 1.3 billion; United States, 300 million; Indonesia, 270 million. Because these countries are so highly populated, you're dividing by more people, so the average is going to be lower. Okay, which is why you don't see a China. Macau is like an autonomous region of China. It's not officially part of China, which is why you don't see the mainland of China, why you don't see India in the top. Those countries, if you scroll down, look at that, way down here. I still don't see them. Where are they? There's China right there. And India's down there, okay? So GNI purchasing power. Essentially, what it is, it's the average income of your citizens in your country. Okay. Oh, one other thing I was going to bring up too. Another good economic statistic that you can use to determine like the difference between a developed and developing country, you can use something known as GDP. This is just from Wikipedia. GDP stands for gross domestic product. This isn't in your notes, but GDP means gross domestic product, and what that means, it's the value of all goods and services your country produces. So if you look at the top here, the United States is number one in GDP and has been for a long time. You'll see China's up there, Japan, Germany, UK, India's up there. That means we make a lot of stuff that's valued really high. We make a lot of computer products, entertainment, finance. We provide a lot of financial services, education. Like I said, computer software, healthcare, aviation products, automobile products. Those are all highly valued and highly priced. So anytime you make really expensive stuff, your GDP is going to be higher because you're going to sell it at a higher price, and that counts towards your GDP. Notice that countries where we buy a lot of like our shoes and clothes, like Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, those countries are farther down the list because the stuff they make doesn't sell for nearly as high. It's a little cheaper. So the more expensive the stuff you make, the higher you are in this list and the more developed you are. And that's going to factor right into education and healthcare too. So this is slide 9. We're going to get through this slide and one more, and then we'll call it a day. All right, so healthcare. I'm going to pull these up. All right, so healthcare has a lot to do with development worldwide as well, because countries that give their citizens access to more doctors that are more skilled, more hospital beds, better insurance. This usually translates into less people dying, less babies dying in childbirth, people living longer. Crime also factors into this too. If a country has a lower crime rate, that means less people are dying from violent crimes, leading to higher life expectancies. Countries that also have lower drug use and gang problems tend to have lower death rates and higher life expectancies. So these right here on the left would factor into developed countries. Developed countries have more hospitals, have more health services, have better access to health insurance, and therefore people in these countries tend to live longer, and babies tend to survive childbirth. Whereas countries that need this kind of stuff, that don't nearly have the hospitals, the skilled doctors and nurses, medicine, and the latest cutting edge education on healthcare, more people are going to die as a result of that. And other factors you have to consider as well. Higher rates of gang violence, crime rates. If there's more people out of work, that means more people are going to turn to crime. Higher death rates, lower life expectancies. So there's a lot of variables that go into this, but healthcare is a good variable to consider when trying to figure out if a country would be classified as developed here on the left or developing on the right. And again, you could apply this not only to a country, but within a country too. You think about some of the regions of the United States where opioid use is a lot higher, drug use is higher. Well, what does that mean? That might be an area of the United States that's not as developed, and therefore they have lower life expectancy. Some of your rural areas, more higher death rates. All right. This will be the last slide. So education. Oh, let me go back there. All right. So one of the statistics that geographers use in education is something called the literacy rate. The literacy rate is the percentage of people who can read and write. And if I had to ask you right now, where would you find higher literacy rates in the world? Developed countries or developing countries? Where would you find them? Well, you'd find them in developed countries, because places like the United States, your European countries, Denmark, Scandinavian countries, France, UK, tend to have better schools, more structured schools where kids have to go to school until age 18 approximately. The schools have better access to internet and Wi-Fi and technology. Gives the kids more options too, in terms of the types of training you want to pursue, whether you want to be a teacher or a doctor, a politician. And there's an emphasis on education. It's mandated by governments. And luckily, in these places, governments have money, taxpayer dollars, to pay for all this kind of stuff, to pay for the nice classrooms, the desks, the computers that you see the kids on there. But then if you walked into a developing country and went into a school system, you would see schools that look more like this, where kids are tend to leave school by the time they're 11, 12 years old. They're needed more on farms. They're needed more in the cities to work, to help their families out. There's not as much of an emphasis in their culture on education. So it's not as encouraged by their parents to go to school. They don't. There's not as many jobs that require education. There's a lot more farm work and manual labor work, which doesn't need as much education. So there just isn't as nearly a high. There's a lack of emphasis, guys, on education in developing countries, which means that you're going to find if you walked into a average school system, say in Libya, a country in North Africa, and walked into a school in France, the average school child, the average student in Libya is going to have a much lower literacy rate. They won't be nearly as skilled and talented because they've gone to school less. They don't have the same types of resources that a student in, say, France or here would have. Okay? All right, so we're going to wrap it up there. When we come back on Thursday of this week, we will go over the final 5 or 6 slides. And what I'd like you guys to do when you're done with this slide and done with this video is to fill out the quiz in Canvas. And that's it for today. Email me with any questions. Have a good day. Hope you're doing well.